It's a beast! 650B. This light, this freaking light, this one you can put out and compete with the sun. Sun side, light side. Like compared to the Aries that I've used, like the big daylight lights that I would shoot, if I shot Scania trucks, for instance, in a big studio, we would have like 3 or 5 of these bad boys, like as like HMI lights. And they are so freaking pricey, like they're super expensive. If you buy this from somebody else, it's so freaking expensive. This is a cheap light, but it's a pro light. Strobe. That's what's so freaking crazy about it. So all of these you can change the speeds of as well. Welding. This is the max. It's too bright. But the reason why you want to be able to do that, because I mean you can just dim it like this. But the reason why you want to be able to have this much light is to fight either windows or you want to fight the sun. This is the sun, this is the light. And if I'm directed like this, it's super nice. Like my face looks great, right? I would have liked the spotlight because then you could have extended this a bit. I guess this is like 1, 2, 3, 4 meters away. Let me just kill it for a second so you can see. So this is what it looks like without the sun. I mean the light, which is the second sun. Anyway, this is with. Okay, so face is more lit up, and this is without. So like 4 meters away, works pretty perfectly. If I would move it back more, it would probably not be able to like fight the sun like this. If I would have had the Fresnel adapter for this, it would have extended it and boosted the kick of it, so you could get like more powerful and directional light. Because what it does is it just directs and extends the light. So I really think that's essential for gear like this. But it's pretty simple. Like you can use the sun much more efficiently with a light like this. And you're not so dependent on like just working with one light, which is this beautiful sun here. The most remarkable thing about it is that it's super quiet with all the modes and all that stuff, that like you get more easy to use type of gear and you get more power. If you don't need that power, if you can adapt to the sunlight and if you can adapt to situations, then fine, you don't need it. But the key thing for me is to have a camera that can handle it. And I think the pockets in my camera can definitely handle it. It doesn't have, like I don't need more dynamic range than that. Okay, so now I have set this up a little bit. Now this is not motivated, so I wouldn't do it like this. Like there's no source in terms of a light source that motivates this flickering. But if I just put this on, then it totally makes sense. These wouldn't do much because it's too bright in here. So like having an additional light that does this is really nice. Like it creates a really moody vibe. This might not be the prettiest thing in the world, having the lights right here. How do you use lights and then motivate them? Like you can control it from the app as well, so it's super simple. But I just really like working with lights this way, because like you can put moods into scenes that doesn't really have them. You can tell stories with light as long as it's motivated. It should make sense to the viewer, because what you're essentially trying to do is not pull them out of the story, but into the story. And using lights in a motivative way does that. If you use lights that you're noticing that there's a light over there, then yeah, it's not a good way of using lights, because it destroys the whole illusion of this being for real, which is essentially what you're going after with the cinematic storytelling techniques. Like you want people to be more immersed into the story, not less. I would really like a LED panel as well that does this, that I could bring more easily to my shoots. So this one, it's amazing, especially for like commercial shoots and for studio shoots, and for instance putting it outside a window and having it be like sunlight coming in. This light is great for that. If I would get one for the documentary work that I do most of the time, I would probably go with a panel light, and GVM has that as well. And you want to be like programming them or using the light modes that they have to create these effects. I really love that simplicity, because just putting it on and then like it flickers, and sure, you can program this much more fine-tuned than I've done now, but I just wanted to show you how simple it can be. Have you thought about this? Going to learndocumentary.com, because there you can actually learn how to pitch Netflix. So if you're ready to do that, come hang out at learndocumentary.com. Now let me just move it a little bit closer, and you're gonna see how much of an effect it does when you have a more of a kick to it. So let me put it around like 2 meters. So this is basically what you would get, I think, if you added the Fresnel. I can't really say because I don't have it, but if you added a Fresnel, let me know how much of an effect it does. I think that you would be able to get from a further distance like I was before, like you would be like 2 meters away like I am now. So, look pretty good. Well, what do you think? Comment below. All right, so you got this app. So I can just turn it on and off very simply. I can change the color very quickly, just like that. And you have, okay, so let me put it to like 5,600-ish. I can't really see because it's so sunny, but yeah. And then you get the effects. So let me go into the effects. And lightning, for instance. I don't know, I don't have any sound. Yeah, so that's the lightning. Often film shoots lack in time, and anything that you can do to get more time for shooting, that's super valuable. And this is what I did when I did an ad for Craft Sportswear. We used one of the lightning scenes modes as a character was walking into a coffee shop. And it was super impactful and simple to do. And all you wanted to do then was to like wet the ground and then just have the light source bounce off of the pavement, and it looks super cool. That's the stuff that I love to play around with. Like, how do you create these light effects that enhances the story and puts the people into the story? And with that scene, you needed the audio as well to work together with the light to make it, you know, make sense. In another scene that we did for the Craft Sportswear ad, we used it during a fire scene. And that was also super impactful. You just put it up and you put the fire up, and then you use that to light the faces, because usually the lights that you're getting aren't as strong as you want them, but this creates like a cinematic storytelling element using the light, and it's super impactful. Find a way to create depth by using a backlight or, you know, a practical light. Here's an example where we shot Tommy Rivs, for instance, in a New York hotel room. It was a terrible setup, and he was wrecked from running and he needed to be in the bed, so the interview ended up where it ended up. But just playing around with the lights, turning them on and off, and just, yeah, seeing what works the best to create depth, this turned out okay. And in Madeira we did a different one where the whole hotel that we were shooting at was terrible, and it was noisy and all those things. So instead of just like shooting outside where it was noisy and all that, we put him in our room that was total mess. There was gear everywhere, besides, you know, the stuff that we shot. And then we just opened the door and created depth by, you know, lengthening the room, put a backlight so that we separated him, and then a key light on his face. And that was it. Just work with like the simple solutions on docs, because it's rare that you have the time to set things up. Just become really proficient at setting up fast, quick interview setups, because you don't have the time. Think about how the presence or absence of shadow can contribute to the story or telling. And don't be afraid of using hard shadows or darkness. This is an amazing way to create suspense. And just make sure to have enough contrast so that you can make out what you're watching. Usually these scenes are hard to push in the grading, so try to get as much information as possible, you know, in the areas, faces for instance, that you want visible. That's super important. And when you're using natural light, you gotta consider how different times of the day, weather conditions, and all those things can influence the narrative. And the harsh midday sun might underscore a character's isolation, while, you know, the soft light of a cloudy day might soften a tense scene. Most of the time I use natural light, but I always strive to find ways to position myself, you know, and the subject so that it creates a cinematic look. And for me, this often means shooting into the shadows, just working to create like a 3D room that I can separate the background, the mid layer, and the foreground using light. And I try to use composition like leading lines to help with this as well. And leading lines is basically like these lines that you can see that draws you into the picture. Use those to create like compositions that invite the viewer into the story as well. And try to think of how they, as the narrative is told, how they help with that. You know, it's easy to add contrast in the post, and it's easy to drag the shadows down, but it's very hard to save it, you know, by bringing it up, because the shadows will often introduce a lot of noise. So try to get things pretty much as you want them, and then like push it a little bit to pop the image, but don't expect to be able to do like magic in the post-production. That's the biggest mistake I see many people do. They either overexpose or they underexpose. Try to get it in the middle. If you're looking at a histogram, if this is the histogram, then you want it to look like a mountain. That's the general rule. Just try to get it like that, and you will be golden in terms of exposure. But think of the key elements that you're trying to expose the most. Like for instance, I would underexpose certain areas of an image by intent if I'm going for a mood, for instance. But I would keep the face or whatever it is that I want to have exposed in a certain way, usually like in the middle. Keep it very simple so that you actually are able to create a consistent cinematic look. And that's going to depend on what time you have and what resources you have. But I would just try to work with as much natural light as I can, and then find key scenes where you want to play with things. So for instance, in the Pearl of Africa, I think it was during the time that they were in hiding, there I actually lit the scene very much to create, like it was shot in the daytime and I made it into a nighttime scene. So that's another thing that you can play around with lights. And it's super cool when you have tools that are so simple to create, like nighttime vibes, or even like if you're doing a club scene, having the strobe that this 650 has. It's super cool. And I wasn't used to working with these types of lights a long time ago, so don't be like intimidated by them because they're so technical. But the thing is, once you start working more professionally, these types of lights are what you're gonna come across, and they're getting more and more technical in terms of what modes you have, and like you can fine-tune them in a totally different way. But I think the most essential part of learning lighting and learning how to create cinematic scenes with light is just to learn the basics. And that comes down to the same things in natural lighting as it does with practical lighting and with artificial lighting. It's the same type of things you got to think about. And it all comes down to how do you create a 3D space in a room, and how do you tell stories with light. You can do that by learning it with still photography. That's how I learned it. And then, you know, you're gonna advance and you're gonna get more used to working with like professional lights eventually. But just use like practicals like this light. Can I turn it without breaking anything? Just these types of lights. Cheap IKEA light. These are great, like as practicals. Use what you have and then try to make the most out of it. It's not complex if you don't make it into it. If you want help turning your shitty camera into a better camera, then I have a cheat sheet. how to make any camera look like $100,000 and $1,000 camera. Download the cheat sheet at johnnycinematic.com. Comment what you think about lighting. How do you create the best cinematic lighting? And how do you tell stories using cinematic lighting? Strobe. That's what's so freaking crazy about it.